Okay, so there's two, maybe three reasons that you're watching this video right now. One, you're a Boston Bruins fan, in which case, welcome, but this is going to be mostly about the Kraken and venting about what's been going on here for the last few games. Two, you're an optimistic Kraken fan, which usually I fall right in line with. I like to try and be a little bit more optimistic, and maybe you just want someone to tell you that it's going to be okay and that this is just an aberration. The Kraken aren't as bad as they've looked in the last couple of games, and honestly, past today, past getting this out of the way, when the dust settles, I guess if I'm being completely honest with myself and realistic about where I think the reality of the situation lies, that is probably more where I'll end up thinking in the long term. But right now, I am definitely thinking a little bit more along the lines of the third group, which are, I don't know, call them what you want, masochistic fans that are watching a recap of another terrible Kraken game because they either want to watch the world burn, or maybe more accurately, they just want a release of the frustrations they're feeling at having watched this team and spent significant chunks of back-to-back weekend days, because they play two games Saturday and Sunday. Well, one game on Saturday and one game on Sunday. Either way, significant portion of your weekend you just spent watching this team pretend to play hockey, or basically just go out there for a public skate 2 games in a row and then try to make it up to you with promising-ish third periods where they finally show up to play and, hey, maybe we'll get back into the game, but they don't even bother to score either time. Which, yeah, by the way, spoiler alert, the Kraken, for the second game in a row making franchise history, get shut out 2-0 in Boston. Sorry, what's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken, for the first time in franchise history, get shut out in back-to-back games. And just in case you wanted a little bit more fun facts, I guess, for a lack of a better term, about the Kraken misery for the last couple of days, it is now the second time this season the Kraken have had a back-to-back, both times back-to-back weekend games, so it's the second time now the Kraken have wasted our weekends. Well, the first time they did win the first game. Anyway, it's the second time the Kraken have played a weekend back-to-back, and in the second game of each of those back-to-backs, for the second time, the Kraken were on the road, traveling to play a team who was also on the second half of a back-to-back, both times that team having won the previous game of the back-to-back 3-0. And both times, the Kraken go in and get shut out 2-0, handing that team back-to-back shutout wins. Which I don't know how easy that was to follow, but the point is, we've seen this happen before. We saw a shutout happen literally the day before, but we've seen the Kraken come in and just lay an egg in the second half of a back-to-back on a Sunday, and it just so happened that for the second time in a row, the team that the Kraken lost 2-0 to. Both games were 2-0 losses, the other one being in Dallas at the beginning of the season. Both times with the Bruins and the Stars, they were coming in after having shut a team out 3-0. And the first time, the Stars had done it at home, I'm pretty sure, so sure, it's the second half of a back-to-back for them too, so there's no excuse for the Kraken coming in looking like the more fatigued and tired team, because both teams are on the second half of a back-to-back. But at least with the Dallas one, I'm, again, pretty sure that their first half was also a home game, so they didn't have to travel like the Kraken did, and certainly traveling between days of a back-to-back does make things more difficult. But this one, that excuse is completely gone, as Boston was also coming in off of travel, having played the day before in Philadelphia, which granted is closer than Ottawa, but it's still traveling between days of a back-to-back, and Boston still came out looking like a team that was on 2 days rest versus a Kraken team that looks like they've been playing for the last 13 days straight. And at least with the Dallas game, and this is what I said at the time, that is a very good Dallas Stars team, and regardless of whether or not it was the second game in 2 days, or if the Kraken had come in on 2 days rest, Dallas is a very good team who was playing well at the time. It's just going to be a difficult game regardless, playing in Dallas against a team like that that's as well-balanced and structured as they are. And while Boston has been a very good team in the last few years, or honestly the last couple of decades, this has been a good team, they have not been playing that way to this point in the season. They haven't been terrible either, but they came into this game with the same record as the Kraken at 5-6-1, and aside from the shutout that they had over the Flyers in the previous game, had not really looked good in their last few games. Of course, the same could be said about the Kraken, who now, after this game, have played 3 straight games where they should have gotten shut out. Let's be honest, they probably should have gotten shut out in Toronto. They just managed to get one garbage time goal with the 6-on-5 at the end of the game. It still counts, but they were that close to getting shut out in 3 consecutive games. Especially with how those last couple of games went, the one in Toronto and then the one in Ottawa yesterday. And I think I even said this at the end of the video with the Ottawa R&R that at least this game in Boston couldn't be much worse, right? Things had to get better. Oh no, the Kraken found a way to make it worse in this one. Wait, what do you mean that this game was worse than the game in Ottawa? They lost 3-0 in Ottawa rather than 2-0 here against the Bruins. And the Bruins, at least on paper, their roster looks a lot better than the Senators' roster, right? Well, for one, again, between the two, the Senators have probably been playing better so far this season, and maybe that'll change as the season goes along. We get deeper into things. And as far as the score is concerned, Ottawa scored their third one with an empty netter, and there's no empty netter in this one, so I suppose at least the Kraken defended their empty net at the end of the game better than they did against the Senators. And in a lot of ways, the game did play out pretty similar to the game against the Senators. The Kraken just don't show up for the first 40 minutes. Again, basically just go out there for a public skate and just move around the ice and, I guess, bend but don't break defense-wise when they're in their own end. But even there, in their own end of the ice, they were, I would say, noticeably worse than they were in Ottawa. I mean, for one thing, Decord had to play out of his mind to only give up 2 goals in this game. And even beyond how well Decord played, the Kraken got a couple pretty fortunate bounces in the third period for this score not to look worse than it was. Which actually, when it comes to that, and I suppose we might as well actually talk about the game itself a little bit and how we got to that final score, how Boston got its 2 goals. Well, as it turns out, they almost did make this score look worse than it is on the scoreboard at the end of it, as they did put the puck in the net 3 times in the first period, but the third one gets called back for an offside, which on replay I have to say it looked pretty clearly like an offside, so they did correctly call that one back, as opposed to in Ottawa where they questionably, and I would say maybe somewhat biasedly so, incorrectly gave Ottawa a goal on an overturn. In this one, they actually take one away from Boston, so that's already a way that the Kraken defensively were breaking a little bit more than they did in Ottawa. And there were some arguments with the offside that I saw some Bruins fans trying to make, that it wasn't clearly offside because he had possession as he crossed the blue line, so even though he crosses, or even though his skates cross the blue line before the puck, that means he's not offside because he has possession. He did not really have possession of the puck at all. Certainly not clearly have possession, so I don't think that argument holds any water whatsoever. To me, clearly offside, so they correctly overturned that one. Either way, by that point, it was already 2-0 Bruins, and they did not show any signs of looking back, as within 3.5 minutes, the Bruins get a nice tip in front of the net. It's a shot from up in the corner, maybe the top of the face-off circle, from, I want to say McAvoy? Actually, no, I think it was Zadorov that shot the puck. McAvoy passed it to Zadorov. Zadorov shoots it, and then Brazo, who came up midway through the season last year, I hadn't honestly heard of him that much. I don't watch as much of the Bruins, obviously, as I do the Kraken. But either way, Brazo tips it in, hits his 4th of the season, so he's gotten off to a pretty good start for a guy that's just coming into the NHL for his first full season. And even though it is just the 3rd shot on goal for the Bruins, 3.5 or so minutes into the game, there's really not much of anything Decord can do about this one. It is just a really nice tip from Brazo in front of the net as he's screening Decord on the play. So Decord's out trying to take away the angle from the shot, and also getting screened at the same time, so he's kind of having to lean out to the side. And Zadorov will give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he was intentionally putting this one wide of the net so that it set up Brazo for this tip to go behind Decord and into the net, giving Boston that 1-0 lead. From there, the Kraken start their parade into the penalty box that was the first period. 3 Boston power plays that are spaced out throughout the final 10 minutes of the first period. Now, I suppose, to be fair to the Kraken, their scouting report probably would have shown coming into the game, even with a shorter amount of time to look at the scouting report, but that the Bruins power play and penalty kill, really both of their special teams units, have gotten off to pretty bad starts to the season. I mean, especially their power play has been pretty anemic. It's been one of the worst power plays in the NHL through the first almost month of the season, even worse than the Kraken power play, which has been certainly below average so far. So you maybe don't worry too much about the Bruins getting a bunch of power plays, but if you tempt a team with as much top-end talent as the Bruins have, eventually they're going to figure it out, and sure enough, they do figure it out, as Charlie Coyle gets lost completely behind the play on the backside of the net, where have you heard that before? I'll give you a hint, the game in Toronto, where the Kraken constantly lost, especially Nylander on the backside of the net, only this time it's on the power play or the penalty kill for the Kraken, so yeah, the Bruins do have one extra guy on the ice, which means one guy's not going to be able to be covered, only on this one, Marchand, who is the one that passes it to Coyle on the far side, also isn't covered whatsoever. So Kraken have 4 guys out on the ice, and well, pretty much 3 of them are covering Pastrnak in the slot. And look, he's a good enough player with a good enough shot, and they like to try and feed him on the power play where, yeah, maybe it is worth shading at least 2 guys and maybe double teaming him. But 3 is certainly a little bit much, especially when you're leaving the back door completely wide open, and Coyle's a good player in his own right, so Marchand gets the puck to him through Borgen, and then Coyle just makes, to Decord's credit, Decord does get back to the other side before Coyle can just put it in a half-empty net, but it's a one-on-one, and Coyle makes a couple of very nice moves to get around Decord. Honestly, a lesser player, Decord, is stopping this puck, but Coyle, yeah, just a couple nice moves, and he wraps it into the corner, and it's 2-0 Bruins less than halfway through the first. So, alright, things have not been going particularly well in the defensive end, or at least when it comes to discipline and staying out of the penalty box, they've not been going well, which gives the Bruins all of the chances that they've had. How have things been going at the other end of the ice? It can't possibly be worse than how it was going in Ottawa, where the Kraken barely got into the offensive end in the first period. Well, wouldn't you know it, we're 14 minutes into the first period by the time the Bruins get done with their third power play. How many shots on goal do you think the Kraken have? Well, if you guessed 0, you'd be correct. The Bruins are outshooting the Kraken 14 minutes into this game, 14-0. Yup, you heard that right. The Bruins are outshooting the Kraken 14-0. They have scored 2 goals and had 2.5 power plays before the Kraken even have a shot on goal. And just to be perfectly accurate, they hadn't actually finished their third power play before the Kraken get their first shot on goal, as the Kraken get their first official shot on goal with a shorthanded chance from Brandon Tanev. Tanev was great on the third penalty kill. This isn't to take anything away from how Tanev was playing on the penalty kill, but it really wasn't a very dangerous chance. It was honestly kind of slid on net as a just way to finish off the forecheck or rush down the way, and really just to buy the Kraken a little bit more time to finish their change so the second penalty kill unit could get out there for the back half of the kill. And I suppose, to be perfectly fair, the second shot on goal the Kraken get, which comes just a couple seconds after this Bruins power play comes to an end, so even though they do score the once on the power play and after 5 chances on the night, the Bruins power play is a +1. Boy, did they give the Kraken some chances either while they were shorthanded or just after coming to the end of a power play. And the second shot on goal the Kraken get in the game, which is with 3 minutes left in the first period. So, yeah, we are already at a point where the second shot on goal is, 17 minutes into the game. It is a very dangerous one that nearly goes in, but Swayman comes up with a pretty big save. So the Kraken, they already know they got shut out, so obviously they don't score there. And they do actually outshoot the Bruins 4-1 between the last few minutes of this first period and the first couple minutes of the second period. However, that also includes a Kraken power play where they don't get a single shot on goal. So, yeah, really not much to write home about at the very least. With that, then, we go to the second period, which happens, and then we go to the third period. Honestly, almost nothing of note whatsoever happens in the second period. I suppose towards the end of it, once again, there's a parade to the penalty box. The Bruins get 2 more power plays. The Kraken get 1 in the middle of those 2. The Kraken power play, they, for a second time in a row, don't get a single shot on goal. And I suppose the second Bruin power play, it is worth mentioning that midway through that power play, the Kraken get what is unmistakably their best offensive shift of the game to that point with about a minute left in the second period. And I'm not even kidding about that. It is quite literally their best offensive shift to that point in the game at almost the end of the second period, and it's happening short-handed, mostly between Yanni Gordon and Jared McCann, though Will Borgen comes into the end to kind of help out a little bit. The Kraken do almost score short-handed a couple of times, obviously again shut out so they don't score, and we do go to the third period where the Kraken are still getting outshot very significantly. Now the total is 30-10. And actually going into the intermission, we thought it was even worse than that, as the official scorekeeping adds 3 shots on goal during this intermission. That'll happen. They'll look at the replays and make sure that there's some corrections that need to be made that they get made. So they do that. They find 3 more shots somehow that the Kraken got in the game to make it 30-10 when we start the third period. But that still leaves the Kraken needing to get 7 more shots on goal just to equal the franchise low for shots in a single game, which, based on how they played the first 2 periods and 2 of the periods in the game before that, boy did it feel like a long shot that the Kraken were going to get there. But wouldn't you know it, for the second straight game, the Kraken, who, again, basically showed up in definition and nothing else for the first 2 periods, and even played worse defensively than they did in Ottawa, all of a sudden look like they're actually an NHL team in the third period and not only get to that franchise low, but pass it within the first 9 minutes of the third period. I mean, actually, by the time we reach the halfway point of the third period, the Kraken have already over doubled their shots in the game up to 21. So, yeah, apparently whatever was going on with them wasn't actually a inability to play offense. It was just that they decided not to for 40 straight minutes, and they were going to try to come back, even though that clearly didn't work the literal night before. And once again, if we're being honest, just like with that third period in Ottawa, the Kraken played pretty well in this third period, and I would say they played well enough to deserve a goal if you really buy into especially expected goals. Expected goals would say the Kraken earned a goal in this period, but Swayman had a couple of big saves. The Kraken, again, couldn't quite get a bounce, though this time I don't think you can really even complain about the Kraken getting the worst end of the luck situation in the game, as the Bruins really couldn't get a bounce in this third period either. They twice managed to get pucks behind a cord with completely wide open nets, and twice threw the puck through the blue paint behind a cord with the net just gaping open. One was Marchand, who puts it right behind a cord through the blue paint. The other one was, I can't remember, is maybe McAvoy or Coyle again. Both of them had pretty good games. Probably one of the two of them. Either way, the Bruins had their chances missed as well, so you can't even say that the Kraken got the worst end of luck in this game. They just, really didn't earn anything until the third period, and even there, it's too little too late. Stevenson had one good shot where he did beat Swayman. He was the only one that really beat Swayman in this game, but that one ends up going off a crossbar and out because, of course, it did. So once again, the Kraken end up pulling. This time it's Decord, who, again, had an absolutely outstanding night in net for them. Unfortunately, he just gets absolutely no goal support, but they pull him with 3.5 or 4 minutes left in the game. They get a few more good chances at 6-on-5, still can't get any to go. Do prevent the Bruins from hitting the empty net, so at least that saves one more on the goal differential, I guess. But when all is said and done, as we already know, the Kraken don't score. The score finishes 2-0 Bruins, and the Kraken are shut out for the third time this season, which, by the way, is more than they got shut out in the entirety of the second season when they made the playoffs. So when we're trying to look at where the trajectory of this season is headed, well, when it comes to scoring, even though they had the 8-goal game, which is not something they really did in the inaugural season or last year, at least not very frequently anyway, and they had the 6 and 7-goal games back when this team actually looked like it was playing well, it has still been slim pickings for offense over these last 7 games, as the Kraken are now, after starting the season 4-2-0, they've gone 1-5-1 in their last 7. And yes, the schedule has been difficult over that span, but Ottawa is a team that you really should be with. They're kind of in the middle of the East. You're kind of in the middle of the West. That's at least a team you're on par with. And the Bruins, sure, they've been a very good team the last couple of years, but they're playing like a team that's on par with you right now. I don't really think you can use the excuse of schedule for these last couple of games. And the Kraken just didn't even look like they were anywhere near, certainly offensively, where these other two teams have been. Which I think pretty obviously is frustrating for a number of reasons, chief among which, in especially these last 2 games, is that the Kraken completely wasted 2 outstanding goaltending performances. Grubauer was quite good in Ottawa, I'd say his best game of the season. I don't think he's necessarily been bad so far this year, but it was his best game for sure. And then this game was maybe not Decord's best yet of the season, but it was one of his better games. He was very, very good, as I've said a couple of times, in net, and definitely played well enough to get a win. But this game is a perfect example of why wins and losses are just a really dumb stat to attribute to goaltending. Though, like pitching in baseball, they still get attributed to the goaltender just like they get attributed to the pitcher, even though there are very frequently cases where what the outcome of the game has nothing really to do with the goaltender in this case. We saw that for years and years with Felix pitching, that he would be one of the best pitchers in baseball, and at the end of the season, he'd have a 500 win-loss record because the Mariners couldn't score a run to save their lives, and, well, we've seen that a bit with Grubauer in net, and now Decord's getting a bit of a taste of it too. Let's be honest with ourselves, he got a taste of it last season. So then I suppose the question is, what's going on with this team, and where do we expect things to go from here? Well, I don't think this team is as bad as their 1-5-1 record over these last few games, but it certainly is making you question whether or not they're anywhere near as good as the 4-2 record that they had through the first 6 games. And I think pretty clearly the bigger problem right now is the offensive end of the ice, which was the big problem last year as well, and it's also the thing that was supposed to be solved with the new coaching system, the Bielsma's bringing in with the faster pace, more north and south, focusing on transition game and not so much dump and chase. And to be honest, at times the Kraken are really able to do that for the most part until these last couple of games. Really, even I would say the Toronto game, they are a fun team to watch. But aside from the Dallas game, which I think you can attribute that to Dallas just being a good team, aside from that one, these last 2 games and the Carolina one, this team, even when they've lost, has been a fun team to watch. They've been getting up and down the ice, creating offensive chances. Just now here in really just this weekend, it's disappeared out of nowhere. And the Toronto one, yeah, again, they don't score through the first 2 and most of the third period. They don't score until they have the extra man out on the ice at the end of the game. But even there, they were creating chances throughout the game. It just didn't end up happening for them. And then, I mean, again, even with these last couple of games, suddenly in the third period, they show up and they're a completely different team that's suddenly capable offensively, where they looked like an AHL team playing against an NHL team for the first couple of periods. So it's really hard to pin down what's going wrong, though. Again, for me, it kind of keeps coming back to, and obviously there's more to it than just this, but there's just too much to dismiss it as a coincidence that without Vince Dunn, this team is just a completely different team offensively. And we've already talked about especially the goal scoring aspect of the Kraken without Dunn a couple of times now, most recently I think after the game against Montreal, where they doubled their goals so far this season without Dunn. They scored 8 goals in that game, which was their total in 5 games leading into that without Dunn. And now they're right back to having scored 1 goal in the last 3 games, which does then make that one game in Montreal look a bit of an outlier compared to the rest. And honestly, it looks even more like an outlier offensively when you look at the shots on goal, where in that game they only got 23 shots on goal and still somehow got 8 of them to go into the net. And yes, right off the bat, it is definitely true that shots on goal are not the be-all, end-all stat or anything like that. There are even better advanced stats certainly out there. Not all shots are created equal, as certainly we saw in the first season where the Kraken almost refused to take a shot unless it was from the blue line. But it can be a good indicator in larger sample sizes of different trends with the team. In this case, how they play with and without Vince Dunn. Because in the 5 games that the Kraken have played with Vince Dunn the entire game, the Kraken have averaged 30.6 shots on goal in those games. Versus the 7 games they've played without Vince Dunn for the entire game, they're averaging just over 24 shots on goal per game, 24.14 to be exact. And just to be clear, I'm not counting the game in Seattle against the Avalanche, since Dunn played part of that game and then left. So I'm not going to go in and figure out what part of the game Dunn played and how many shots the Kraken had there versus the part he didn't play. We're just going to not count that one, go 5 games, Dunn played the entire thing, 30.6 shots on goal. 7 games, Dunn has not played, 24.1 shots on goal. And for what it's worth, that game where Dunn played part of it, they had 27 shots in that game. So although that's a little bit more anecdotal, it does fall right in the middle of those 2 averages. And just to more drive home the point of how big of a difference that is, well, in the 5 games that the Kraken played with Dunn, they had 17 fewer total shots in those 5 games than they have in the 7 games that they have played without him. So yeah, it's pretty bad. That is less than, certainly when you're talking about averages, less than a single game's worth of shots on goal difference between 2 games worth of difference in how many games the Kraken have played without Dunn versus with him. So who knows, maybe this all gets solved whenever Dunn comes back from his injury, and hopefully he stays healthy then for the rest of the season. There's still also a decent chance that it is at least partially a coincidence, and Dunn coming back doesn't suddenly solve whatever issue the Kraken had, certainly in the first 40 minutes of each of these last 2 games. I do think his vision, seeing the ice and starting those breakouts and getting the Kraken clearly into the offensive end is a pretty big contributing factor, even if, and look, Dunn wasn't necessarily having a great start to the season. It was a pretty middling start to his year through those first 5 games that he played. But yeah, I think it is especially the way that he can consistently start those transitions for the Kraken from the back end is making at least a chunk of that difference. Whatever the case though, the Kraken, it probably goes without saying, need to get something figured out offensively. without Dunn, because he's not going to be back for the next couple of games. Much more likely than not, he's not even eligible until 2 games from now. I want to say he has to miss 2 more games. It's coming up, but there's certainly no guarantee, and we haven't heard anything or seen any signs that he's going to be back when the second he's eligible to come off LTIR. It seems almost more like they're getting ready for that stint on LTIR to be a bit longer, which is not promising to say the very least. But again, either way, the Kraken need to figure something out to have a little bit more consistent offense and fill that void that Dunn had, figure out how to transition without Dunn out there. Because if they can only score 2 to 3 goals a game, which is all you can realistically expect with a 24 to even optimistically 25 shots on goal average per game, they're just not going to win a whole lot of games the rest of this season, even with the goaltending performances that they've been getting over these last couple of games, which is another especially frustrating part of how the Kraken played, and especially the first 2 periods of these last couple of games, that they just straight up wasted 2 fantastic goaltending performances. Anyway, this has probably been a bit rambling, and like I said, it was kind of just frustration that needed to be released, especially because I spent the time watching these games, planned weekend plans around being able to watch these games, and then I'm spending the time to make these videos about these games that, quite honestly, I wish I could leave in the past sometimes. So yeah, it's a lot of time spent on games that the Kraken, quite frankly, did not spend very much time on themselves. So we'll finish this one out then with the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon, who would, I'm sure, like me, love to be bringing you better news than these last couple of games, and certainly would like to bring you more stars, but we're going to be fair. And once again, there's only going to be 1 star in this game, and that's going to be Joey Daccord. He was fantastic. I have said it a few times. I could probably think of different adjectives, but quite frankly, I just want to have this game in the past, so we'll stick with fantastic, because that's the word of the day for Daccord. It's a fitting one. He stops 31 of 33 shots, and ended up being one of the official 3 stars, which you don't always see an official star of any kind for a team that gets shut out on the road, but Daccord earned one of those stars, and aside from that, yeah, there's not much else to say about the Kraken in this game. It was not great. Let me know what you think in the comments, though, and until next time in Colorado, where hopefully the Kraken can score at least once, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.